Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of our AMA with Max Howell, who is CEO of PackageX, key contributor to T Protocol. My name is Ben. I'll be the moderator today of the AMA. I want to welcome Max Howell and Matt Lewis. So to this AMA, Max, if you'd quick give an introduction to yourself.
Sure thing. I thought I was going to be a scientist 20 odd years ago. And when I got into science, I discovered I didn't actually enjoy it that much. So I installed Linux on my home computer and discovered open source. And that's been my career pretty much, working on open source and trying to pay for the bills using the skills I learned with open source at various startups and doing contracts and working for a few bigger companies here and there. Open source has always been what I really wanted to do full time, and it was a couple of years ago now that I was once again frustrated by the state of how open source is made sustainable. So I thought that maybe someone had to fix this problem once and for all, and I explored new mechanisms for doing that, which is how I came to found T and T Protocol, which is currently in testnet. We've got over 1 million people signed up on the testnet and on chain, and we're trying to fix the fundamental problem with open source. Open source is pretty amazing, but it has this really quite significant sustainability problem, which is it's a problem for the entire internet and the entire software industry.
Great, thank you for that. We're also joined, as obvious, with Matt Lewis, who's the maintainer of Karma Coverage Istanbul Reporter, amongst many other things. So, Matt, welcome. Glad to have you here. If you could you give us a quick intro of yourself?
Absolutely. So my name's Matt. I'm a software engineer at ClickUp. Before that, I've been doing open source for the best part of like 10 years now. I've been doing it for 3 different companies. Started off with a very, very kind of primitive like Angular 1 calendar component way back in the day. That was kind of my first project of back then. Everything was kind of like jQuery based, and there wasn't really anything out there for Angular 1. So I saw kind of a real kind of gap in the market there almost to go and kind of create this project. Spun it up, just put it on GitHub. I saw other people doing it. I thought, why not? And then, the project kind of took off, and then the whole like Angular 1, Angular 2 thing happened where they basically rewrote the whole framework. So then I rewrote my component. I started porting Angular 1 components to Angular 2. I started the tooling scene back then was really, really bad for anything related to like TypeScript and what have you. So then I started getting into like infrastructure and tooling, started building all these projects. And then kind of all of a sudden I have like 15, 20 different repos now over the years that I built. And yeah, I've tried various different ways over the years to kind of monetize this open source and actually like try and kind of earn a bit of an income from it and kind of get compensated rather than just do it all for free in my kind of evenings and weekends. I've had a little bit of success, but it's never really taken off. So I was quite interested in T and to see how it might be able to help.
Great, thanks for that. Obviously, if anyone watching this can see, the most common ground is open source. So, Matt, question for you here. What got you into open source? Maybe give a little bit of background on how you got in, what kind of spurred some interest in open source, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, really, it was just seeing other people doing it. Like I'd be like signing up to newsletters and seeing like a lot of open source projects kind of linked in there. Obviously, like anyone working in a company is going to be using open source software. It's kind of hard to avoid unless you're working in some kind of crazy like financial services thing where they don't let you use any open source software. So I was kind of, as an engineer, you're kind of just naturally exposed to it. And then, yeah, I just kind of wanted to try and just do my own thing really and see if I could create one of these projects that I saw all these other people doing as well. yeah, it just turned into a really good kind of learning opportunity as well. Like, obviously you're reading like potentially like dozens of other people's source code to be able to send a pull request to multiple different projects. You pick up loads of good kind of tricks. It's really interesting to see kind of other things that you just naturally wouldn't be exposed to in your kind of day-to-day job, where you're generally only working on like a fixed code base written by the people that work around you. Whereas with open source, you can go and look at like thousands of different repositories and written by like thousands of different people. So it was a really good learning opportunity for me. Like, it helped me in my career as well, of just kind of even having like a mindset of just being able to open up a project that I'd never seen before and kind of just start diving into it to be able to contribute to it. So yeah, it was just one of those things. I just kind of naturally just fell in love with it. It just was really, really enjoyable thing.
Yeah, that's great.
I think that's a pretty common way that people get started in open source, because it really is everywhere nowadays, and it's difficult to avoid it. And then once you get involved in it, you realize that you are working with people that have a completely different set of skills to what you see at your company. And open source has this sort of naturally meritocratic sort of tendency where like projects that aren't really cutting it just sort of end up getting ignored, and the ones that are basically examples of the state of the art, and you get to learn from people who are like much more talented than you in different areas, and then you sort of find yourself getting up to speed in that way. I think it's one of the most compelling parts of open source that really drags us all into it. So yeah, I'm not surprised that was your entry.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and always cool to see and hear how people got into open source and love it. Like I told Max and said on one of our T's community office hours, always was kind of aware of open source, but never really fully grasp how big it is and how important it is. One of the things that I think is a huge problem with open source, and I think you guys both would agree, is funding. Everyone in open source knows about the Nebraska problem, or the Nebraska guy. Max might kill me for saying it incorrectly there, but Matt, have you gotten funding for any of your open source projects yet? Maybe just talk a little bit about it. I know Max is notorious for saying any project he's gotten in the past, any funding, he could maybe buy himself just a cup of coffee. So if you could just maybe talk about, how you've approached that and if you've gotten funding.
Yeah, sure thing. So, I started back before there was really much of a model or really any kind of solutions out there for open source. The OG thing was kind of setting up a Patreon, which is a platform commonly used by like creators and like artists and things, and you can essentially just tip people on there. I think I probably made like $100 or something from that. It didn't really take off that well. And then the days of kind of Open Collective started, GitHub sponsors launched. GitHub actually reached out directly to me and saw like the amount of projects that I had and said like, oh, would you be interested in joining this GitHub sponsors platform when it came out? And that actually did have a little bit of success. Like I managed to get like a few $1,000s from various people, kind of donated from a few different companies that were reliant on my software. And GitHub were also very kind to kind of match the donations as well for the first year. And that was, I thought like, oh, maybe this is the way for this to go. And then the pandemic hit and pretty much everyone just suddenly pulled all funding. Everything pretty much plummeted. I think I probably make like maybe $30-40 a month off that at the moment now. So it kind of just tanked really. It seems to me like those platforms do work, but you have to have like a massive Twitter following, a massive audience. Someone like Webpack is a classic example with Open Collective, where they had Sean basically acting as like a full-time fundraiser of like going to companies, getting people to kind of sponsor, which like for me, I'm like a one-man person. I don't have time to kind of be like reaching out to all these companies, creating a massive social following to try and get people to donate on these platforms. yeah, just everything's kind of just fizzled out over the years, really.
Yeah, I have a similar story because I tried 1 year to, I was determined to make it so I could work on full-time open source and started a Patreon. And after about 5 months, I was making maybe $800 a month, which didn't come my rent even. And I realized that I was spending, 40-50% of my time marketing myself and trying to come up with ideas for open source that I knew might be able to get attention rather than things I actually wanted to work on or things that I really felt that the community needed. And yeah, open source isn't about that. You shouldn't have to market yourself. The work speaks for itself. And yeah, the existing solutions, they don't really function to give most open source maintainers what they need. Like some people, we all know there's a few open source maintainers out there that are managing to make it work, like Webpack, Simini as an example. But in general, like open source is what almost 3 million developers work on open source, according to our metrics, making about 11 million open source packages. And hardly any of them really have made a sustainable funding effort. And yeah, it's not how it should be.
It's definitely not how it should be when you factor in the companies. If you figure in revenue generated by these companies that utilize open source, it's alarming how little funding there is for this when these major corporations utilize open source the way they do. Matt, what, obviously we're going to stick on funding here a little bit. What is it that made you interested in T and being a testnet user and trying the protocol out? Could you talk on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure thing. So I was just kind of interested, like obviously it's quite a novel idea really, that it's not really every other kind of open source funding model is like going to people and getting them to donate to your project, which kind of people have been trying for years, and it works for a very small minority of people. But as we said, like unless you're great at marketing yourself, then it generally doesn't work for like smaller projects. Whereas looking at T, it's like a completely unique idea that just flips anything I've ever seen like kind of on its head, and actually being able to just use like the T tokens and like actually look at like how popular is an open source project, not like how well it's marketed or whatever, and actually reward projects with the tokens based on like how useful it is. And actually, like I saw like the donation feature went live this morning or something, was it? I'm already seeing like all these donations kind of like pouring into my projects on T, which is really exciting because like, I've never seen anything do that before with any other open source funding solutions out there. So yeah, it looks like a really promising and unique idea, and I'm hoping that it kind of ends up being like a really good solution that anyone that wants to start working on open source can actually use to kind of get themselves funded rather than having to just work for free essentially.
Yeah, it's kind of goes back to hopefully alleviates Max's problem where he said he spent 40 to 50% of his time marketing himself and his project. Hopefully that time and effort that goes to that can be resolved by the T protocol. So on that note, Matt, what do you think of it so far from a developer standpoint or someone that has a package that they uploaded? What are your thoughts on the protocol so far?
Yeah, my experience so far has been pretty positive. Like it was pretty easy to just kind of import all of my projects. Like I like that I can just add them all. It instantly kind of gives me like, I think it's like 10,000 tokens per project, which is quite nice. The gamification's been really good as well, so to actually kind of get me like using the platform and kind of onboarded. I quite like often companies don't add that till like kind of very late in the game. So it's been quite fun, just almost just like completing the bounties, and it's been actually like teaching me how to use the platform, which has been pretty good. And it's quite interesting getting the updates every couple of weeks or months. Like it moves really fast. like every couple of weeks there's something new to kind of try out and experiment with. So yeah, so far it's been really good.
Always good to hear.
Yeah, it's great to hear that. You always can hear feedback from community, but to actually hear from a project user, it's good to hear. So thank you for that. Max, do you have any questions that you would like to ask Matt?
Nothing more specific than's been asked. Like we're at this point now where we have a lot of interest in our platform, and where we need to penetrate is open source maintainers who are more skeptical about what we're doing because of the technology underlying it all, right? Like crypto has this bad rap, which honestly I feel is mostly quite well deserved. And it is a hurdle for us to overcome in terms of convincing the open source community that what we're doing here is genuinely altruistic and has the potential to really change things. And I was wondering, Matt, if you have any thoughts on that, any tips you can offer us.
Yeah, I guess the two halves of crypto are like the cryptocurrency and then the actual blockchain technology itself, right? And I think like the blockchain technology is more of a sound thing that people actually kind of I don't know, have less issues with. Generally, like anything with cryptocurrency is involved in kind of like people getting scammed, using it for like crimes, that kind of thing. And like obviously they're using the blockchain technology to do that. Whereas if you kind of separate those two things out, I think it's harder to have a gripe or an issue really just with blockchain itself as a technology. And I think in terms of like kind of getting people to trust the protocol, I guess it's like you're not asking people for money. Like you just kind of have to ask yourself logically, like what is the scam here? Like there isn't anything. I'm not having to like put my credit card details into T or something like that, or send like I don't know an Ethereum to some blockchain address to register my project. Like there's kind of you just have to think logically. Like is there anything here that could actually go wrong with this, or like have a downside to me? And like so far, like there just isn't anything that I can see that would actually trigger that.
Yeah, well, we were pretty careful with how we designed it to try and minimize how people might feel that way, right? But yeah, there is no scam here. And so once we go live with mainnet later this year, I'm hoping that people will see that. And hopefully success stories like yours will change the remaining hearts and minds. Like we've got a lot of projects onboarded for a testnet, 15,000. We're very pleased with that. But obviously, there's 10.5 million, and we currently support 5.5 million of that. There's other package managers we'll be supporting as we go forward. So there's a lot of opportunity still for open source maintainers that haven't onboarded, and we hope they will before the end of testnet. Obviously, there's points in it for them, so there is an incentive.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things, like as soon as people are actually getting legitimately funded via the T protocol, like it will just speak for itself, and it will become like a no-brainer of like why wouldn't you do this? It's like you could either continue working for free or actually receive rewards for what you're doing. Yeah, I think it's one of those things that will just kind of naturally, organically work.
Yes, that's what we believe. Certainly, most of the open source, vast majority of the open source maintainers I've spoken to see it as a no-brainer. There is no cons for them in terms of onboarding. So yeah, once we go live, I'm sure that we'll see the millions start to onboard themselves.
Yeah, I agree, Matt. We kind of hope that people see the same thing that you mentioned at the tail end there, that it just kind of is a no-brainer and makes sense for these projects to get rewarded for their hard work. So, Matt, that's all the questions we have for you. I think you have some questions you'd like to ask Max now. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So yeah, my first question for you, Max, is but back in the very early days of when I first became a software engineer, like I actually bought my first Mac because of Homebrew. I was like a Windows user. I was struggling to set up all these things locally. I found Homebrew online, and these people just like, oh, you can just run brew install and this command, and it will just work. So I went out and I got my first Mac specifically because of Homebrew. So I'd be really interested just if you could tell me a little bit about the origins of like Homebrew and kind of how you got into open source. Was it actually like your first project, or was there anything before that?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, like it's surprising how often developers say things like that. It's like I bought a Mac because of Homebrew, and I'm like, Apple could have thrown a bit of sponsorship Homebrew's way. You'd think like Mac was, this. Okay, so 2009 is 15 years next week. The Homebrew, I created it. And I had done some other open source projects before. Like I say, I was an unhappy scientist at a lab, and I went home and installed Linux over my Windows machine and discovered open source there. And I built an app first, which was for the K desktop environment, KDE, which was just a sunflower representation of the disk usage on your computer. Because back in the day, like I think my disk drive was my hard disk was like 15 gigabytes or something, so I was continuously running out of space, especially because I liked downloading music quite a lot at the time. It was like 2004-ish, post Napster, but still in the era of like Kazaa and stuff like that. So it was something I needed, so I built it, and it got quite popular because it was nice. And then I was super into music still, so I joined this project which was doing a music player on Linux called Amrock, and there was 3 of us. All our names begin with M, so we called ourselves the 3 M's, and we were scattered around the world. And I just loved working on this music player with them. We all had like different skill sets, different talents, different ideas, and we constructed something that became really very, very popular. And it was because of working on that, I managed to get a job at Last.fm in London, because they really liked what we were doing. So I got into the industry via open source. Still don't have a computer science degree or anything like that. And it was while I was at Last.fm that I created Homebrew, and it was because I switched to Mac after like a weekend of frustration where I upgraded the kernel and I lost my Wi-Fi drivers, and I didn't have internet to fix the problem with, so I couldn't figure out what the problem was, and so I just went to the Apple store and bought myself a Mac. And on there, I discovered that the package management solutions weren't nearly as good as what I was used to on Linux. And I tried loads of different Linux distributions over the years. So I had an idea about all the features I liked in the different distributions that I wanted to see in like this ultimate package manager. And because Mac was gradually becoming the default choice for most developers at that point, it just hit the right timing and became extremely popular really, really quickly. So I quit Last.fm to work on it full time, and over the first few years, I managed to do quite a lot of full time work on it. And I honestly don't think it would be where it is without that time that I spent on it, which was at my own expense. But it over those 15 years has become the de facto solution. Like it's hard to estimate exactly how many users it has, but 50, 60 million is probably the correct answer. So I'm proud of it, and it was really fun. So I always just wanted to work on open source full time. As a result, there's nothing like it. There's nothing else that you can do that has that same kind of buzz where you just make what you think is the best solution for the problem you're trying to solve, and then all your peers, the other developers in the world, go, "Oh yeah, I think you did it." Pat you on the back, and you're like, "Yeah, great, thank you." And then suddenly it becomes this thing which is too big, and then you don't have the energy, the time, or the incentive to continue working on it. Like I burned out after about 4 or 5 years. Fortunately, at that point, there's tons of people who'd stepped up to help with the maintenance, and like I'd shaped the culture of the project so that it could just continue without me. It wasn't necessary for me to be an active participant anymore. stayed on the governance committee until just before I founded T. Actually, I thought at that point maybe there was a bit of a conflict and I should step down.
Yeah, really interesting. So my next question is like what will the process actually look like for using T to be compensated for open source contributions? Either if like I'm a project kind of lead maintainer, or if like I'm just making like a pull request to someone else's repo, like could I get compensated that way? Like how exactly do you see it working?
Yeah, so we've deliberately made it kind of up to the project. So another deliberate decision was that the T token rewards that happen every 24 hours. So every 24 hours, your project receives T token rewards based on how impactful you are to the entire open source ecosystem. And we have an elaborate algorithm to calculate that called proof of contribution, which gives you a T rank based on how you fit in. And like the ranking is fun. You know, everyone wants to know how their project ranks. And I think our ranking system is pretty accurate in terms of how impactful you are. So even buried dependencies that people don't often even know they're using have like good ranks that reflect the actual impact. And you get, yeah, rewards just based on that impact. But those rewards go to the project, not to you as the maintainer who registered that project. So we initially, you know, any transfer of token to people is going to be a manual process. You can either do it yourself because it's all built on top of a permissionless blockchain. You don't have to use our app to transfer those tokens, but our app's the easiest way. So you can either transfer them yourselves, you know, to you, or split it amongst the maintainers. Or what I hope is going to start happening is that people write smart contracts that can automatically distribute those rewards. And one of the things that they could write those smart contracts to do is distribute rewards to people who create pull requests that are merged automatically. Now, how exactly that's going to work, I'm just looking forward to seeing the open source community come up with those ideas or make proposals against the T protocol's governance for how T itself should add features to the application so that that can be automated. Like, I think like almost immediately we'll add something that allows you to automatically distribute the rewards to the maintainers of the project, because that's the most common thing people are going to need. But initially, at least, we'd just like to see what people do so that we can make an informed judgment about what makes sense to work on next. I always like to build products that way personally, where you build most of it and then see what people are doing before you make like further like concrete decisions on direction for next steps.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It'd be interesting actually if I'm just thinking now if you had some kind of like GitHub actions, like I could see people creating some integration there where you could have like a bot like on a pull request, and you could like distribute tokens directly via a bot or something like that, and you could build that on top of the network. I think that would be quite interesting. I could definitely
Yeah,
see
really
that
good
kind of thing
idea.
taking off.
Funnily enough, I hadn't thought of using GitHub Actions for it, but yeah, it makes perfect sense. Like the action could either query you for your T protocol address, or, you know, I was thinking there could be some kind of on-chain storage for uh, if you sign your commit to GPG, for example, then periodically some sort of oracle could filter through all the commits and then distribute token rewards based on number of commits. Like not a great metric, people would gain that, but you know, there's ideas there that could lead to something.
Yeah, no, that'd be quite interesting. So my next question I had was, do you think that T would eventually be able to replace kind of all other forms of open source funding, like GitHub sponsors or Open Collective, or do you reckon it would still kind of continue to exist as like a sibling kind of funding avenue alongside these other solutions?
Yeah, good question. I think what I usually say to this is that I see there being a lot of different ways to approach solving the Nebraska problem, as we call it. in the world of open source. But I think it's possible it might replace some of these systems, because one of the fundamental reasons I created T Protocol is all these systems tend to treat open source as charity. Even grant programs, really, even though they're kind of paying for a feature or a bug fix or some direction, it's really just like begging for them to give grants. Like the word grant by itself kind of suggests a kind of charity. And open source isn't charity. Like it's a complicated and very different system to anything else humanity has ever built, which is why we've struggled to find a suitable sustainability model for it. It like companies don't want to donate because they don't really want to do charity, and it doesn't work when your business managers are trying to persuade their higher ups to donate to a project, because then the higher up is like, well, why would we? We're getting this for free. Like I don't see the point, etc. So one of the things we really try to do with T is change that narrative so people can see how it's no longer a charity. We're exposing the value of open source so you can participate in that value ecosystem. As a company, you can inject capital and see tangible rewards. It's not a donation, it's more like being part of it. So yeah, I think it's possible it could replace all the others, but I do think there's many different ways that this space can be made sustainable, and I think it's unlikely that it will become the only one. I don't want it to become the only one. Competition is healthy. You need other people to come up with ideas you haven't thought of, so you can counter to that or embrace it.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I agree. I think a lot of the problem comes from expecting the kind of consumers of the open source projects to be the ones paying for it. And the reality is, if you're working in a company with hundreds of people, there's the kind of engineer that's gone and installed the package, and there's the person in the finance department responsible for kind of spending and budget, and there's a huge disconnect there between those two people. So it's pretty much, as soon as a company goes past a certain size, it's basically, unless they make it a deliberate part of their ethos. If you have a company where the CEO is an open source founder or something like that, pretty much every other company is just kind of not really going to care enough to actually to donate, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's it's a unique system. It really is. Open source is beautiful in how it works. It just has this one glaring issue that it's been difficult to figure out a solution for.
Yeah, hopefully T is the answer to that. So my next question was kind of, what are the ideas that you have for kind of mid to long term to expand the functionality of T from where it is today?
Yeah, so kind of a side effect of all of what we're doing is improving the security of open source. So this year and coming later in the testnet, we're introducing the bounty system so that people can report vulnerabilities using the T network. And the T token staking system is like the risk pool for those vulnerabilities. And building out these utility pieces on top of what we're doing is necessary in order to make the whole tokenomics system sustainable. So a lot of the things we'll be doing over the next 3 to 4 years is building out more utility on top of our representation of the value of open source, and in ways that doesn't impact open source maintainers in a negative fashion. But also, I want to do things like have slashing events where we penalize projects for violating semantic versioning, for example. Because some of these things are just big problems in open source because the incentives aren't well aligned. If you have an important project, you aren't really incentivized to do semantic versioning properly, but that's very important information for the entire ecosystem. If you break your API and it's not a major version bump, then you are probably breaking tens of thousands of applications or other open source projects that use you. And the open source community has just sort of accepted this as a necessary evil of the nature of open source. because nobody really has the time to do semantic versioning properly, and very few people really understand how to do it properly. So I would like to improve the security robustness of open source by including some of those sort of ideas. But anything we do after mainnet will go via proposal, where the non-profit entity that's launching the protocol that runs the TDAO will allow open source maintainers to make proposals, and then open source maintainers will have voting rights over those proposals to direct the future of the protocol. I really like the fact that what we're building, it doesn't have the normal incentives that happen in Web 2, where the people who have the most money to make out of it are the ones controlling it, typically VCs, right, or the founding team. Instead, it would be run and governed by the people that it benefits, the open source maintainers, the open source community. And so, if they think it's a bad idea, they're going to have the chance to shoot it down before it becomes something that's actually in the protocol itself. Personally, I think it's a great idea, but, we'll see.
Yeah, no, that would be really. I think the security part of that is really important as well. Like when you actually think about kind of these these tool chains and like how at any part in a dependency chain you could just introduce a vulnerability either accidentally or deliberately, and you're just putting so much trust in potentially like thousands of different random engineers that you're just blindly installing their software into your code, and you're hoping that nothing's going to kind of be malicious in there that's actually going to cause like potentially a really serious issue. Like there's been so many kind of close calls where people luckily have caught things, again thanks to the beauty of open source, of like someone actually kind of took the time to dig in and find a lot of these problems when they happen. But like sooner or later there's going to be like some horrific event where it doesn't get caught, or it's already happened and we don't know yet. So yeah, anything that we can do to kind of improve the security of that would be really, really good.
Yeah, well, exactly. Like in the last 15 years, especially, open source went from being considered to be, just niche and hobbyist to powering everything. And, the process didn't really adapt. Like security was always important, but it wasn't really incentivized to be super important. And we didn't build up trust systems to make sure that packages that, especially deep in the stack, like the stack has just got deeper and deeper and deeper in the last 15 years. There was no systems really devised to ensure integrity there. So I hope with T's incentives, we are actually going to help open source maintainers to be freshly incentivized to be more careful with security. Like I'm more pessimistic, right? I think the close calls are the ones we spotted, and there's probably hundreds or even thousands of like exploits, malicious or otherwise, out there that are being exploited. We just don't know about them. It's that classic diagram of the airplane, right, where they reinforced the wrong parts because they were only reinforcing the parts where the bullet holes were when the planes came back, but they needed to be reinforcing the bits that didn't have bullet holes in, because that's what was causing the planes to go down. They weren't looking at the data correctly. And I think that we need to accept that there's a lot more insecure code out there in everybody's applications, and I hope the T can help with that.
Yeah, hopefully it does. So my next question was, how do rewards and staking work on the T protocol?
Yeah, so rewards is simple. Every 24 hours, if you've onboarded your project, we just send you your project the rewards, and you can claim those rewards immediately or periodically. There is going to be a fee associated with claiming the rewards. Not the T protocol itself is taking any of that money, right? But it's just the nature of blockchain where there's gas fees that need to be paid. So you'll probably want to claim them more periodically rather than immediately. During testnet, that isn't shown. So rewards are simple. Once you got them, you can choose if you want to send them to maintainers so that they can use that token. The staking is more complex and is part of the need for us to make the T token have more utility to sustain this system. The reality is you can't just give away token. We've calculated 50 years of emissions. So the truth is, if T protocol launches and we do nothing to it, it will remain on chain, functioning, distributing rewards for 50 years. But if all we do is give rewards, then the price of the token is destined to go to zero. You can't just give away. You have to generate utility inside of that ecosystem to make sure that it's an economy, that there's economics going on. Certainly one of the most fascinating things I found about working on this project, because I didn't really know much about crypto before I got involved in it, is how you can make these like micro systems of economics and then try to make something that is sustainable. Like most people don't really know about those things. They just go to Coinbase and look for the things that are going up, and they just treat it like it's a stock market. But in reality, there has to be a bunch of utility functions in that protocol, or there's no reason for it to go up apart from hype. And crypto is good for hype. It is one of the things that makes it possible to do a bunch of stuff, but you can't have that forever or the token price just dips and then we can't actually achieve our mission. So the staking is one part of that, where you, as someone who just believes in the value of open source, and we have 1.2 million people on board so far that do, can take your token and stake it against projects, thus locking it up. And when it's staked, it's also at risk, because if there is a vulnerability discovered in that project reported via our mechanisms, then there is a risk that you will lose a portion of that stake. But while you have your staked token locked up, we also give you a yield where you can then basically receive rewards yourself. And it's these kind of things that changes that narrative from charity to participating in the value of open source. Because you're not donating token, right? You're putting it at risk and then earning some rewards on top of that. So yeah, staking is a mechanism for creating utility and also encouraging more people to participate in the ecosystem. You as a maintainer get a piece of the yield from those staking rewards as well. So it's in your interest to get more and more people to stake, increases the amount of T token that you're getting on a day-to-day basis as well. But it's completely optional, right? That was one of the necessary things that we knew was part of the system. If you don't want to go out there and encourage people to stake against your project, you don't have to. We're still giving you rewards every day just based on the impact of your project. So you don't have to spend 30-40% of your time marketing your project to try and get stake. But stake's going to be more useful for projects with lower T rank that sit at the edges of the graph, because their impact isn't very measurable with our system. Our system tends to rank projects that are deeper in the tree higher, because they're the ones that have all this dependency data that is the majority of the information we use to calculate ranks. So if you are an application that's open source and you sit on the edge, then staking is going to be something you want your users to do. And because our system is we solve the cold start problem by indexing all the package managers. I think it's going to make it easier for people to choose to participate. So instead of a donation, you're staking. And of course, if you do stake against a project that's going somewhere, then you have the potential to gain a lot of rewards yourself. So you're participating in the success of the projects that you choose to stake. So yeah, I think it's an interesting way to turn that narrative around. You're not just buying someone a coffee, you're also potentially buying yourself a coffee.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It's a very, very kind of novel idea. And yeah, I'm hoping that it really takes off. So can you explain a little bit about like what T rank is and like how do you increase it?
Yeah, so T rank is the impact score that we give projects based on their impact to the entire open source ecosystem. We scan all the major package managers. Well, we have 7, We are missing a few, which we will gradually add after we launch at mainnet. We scan them all to get that dependency information, because that dependency information is extremely good data. As an open source maintainer, you don't depend on things you don't need or are bad, because your project's reputation depends on your dependency choices. If you depend on something that's poorly maintained, then it's going to impact the reputation of your project, and thus the impact of your project as people switch it out for other alternatives. So it allows us to construct a rank that's very accurate and very difficult to gain. The T rank goes from 0 to 100, and you have to have a T rank over 25 in order to earn rewards on a day-to-day basis. Reason for that is because there's a very long tail of open source where the packages that don't actually really do anything or haven't been adopted by anyone, they're just like play projects or toys or abandoned projects. So 25 is very obtainable, provided that you have people in the open source ecosystem that have decided to depend on you, or there's other ways you can raise your rank that are a little more complicated based on like creation date. And if you are depending on other projects that are important, etc. So really the only way to raise your T rank is to convince the open source community to adopt you. And the nature of open source is that that's always been the case. You're not going to maintain an open source project that nobody is using. So you just have to continue doing what you're doing as an open source maintainer, making things that you find useful and that other people find useful too, and your T rank will naturally increase over time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's one of the things that open source has always had really kind of going for it, is that if you make something useful to people, like people will just naturally start using it. Like even like my most popular package, like I kind of marketed it by I posted a single comment on a issue thread on GitHub, and now it has like millions of downloads every month from a single comment. That's all I did.
Yeah. This is, like people ask me how to get into open source all the time, and it's often that, right? You've made something and then you're somewhere in Stack Overflow or GitHub or maybe a Discord, and someone asks about it and you just tell them about it, and then suddenly that's the key time. Like with Homebrew, it was I answered a superuser.com, so that's another Stack Overflow website, about how to build software on your Mac. And I gave a good answer. And then I said, and I put all these ideas into this new piece of software I've written called Homebrew. And I linked to that. And that was the moment, right? I'd spent the few weeks before that working on it and occasionally talking about it on my Twitter. At the time, I only had like 300 followers or whatever, and no one really cared. And it was just because I kept working on it and then saw opportunities to talk about it. And that's how it took off. And it's the case today. You make something that's useful. It might take a bit of time, but eventually, if you keep working on it and keep talking about it, then it will prove its utility and people will adopt it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's all very good. Good questions, Matt. We're getting close to time here, but I do want to ask you guys one final question. And I want to ask if there's someone out there that is interested in getting involved in open source, what would you guys suggest to them on the steps on getting involved, or starting their career per se, or just any interest they have? And Matt, we'll start with you.
Yeah, sure thing. So I guess the best way is just to start small. Like, don't go and create like a huge project from day one. Like, you want to just start by like making a pull request or something to someone else's project, and just get in the flow of like contributing to someone else's project, seeing how things work, what tools they're using, get some ideas about how they're running their project. And then from there, you can actually maybe one day start your own kind of thing of just, if you've got an idea for something that doesn't yet exist, or there's something else that's not as good as what you know that you could build or something, is just go out and just build it and ship it, and people will start using it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more on that. It's really necessary to get started in open source by looking at other people's projects, seeing how open source works, finding one where you feel that the community they have there or the governance structure like really resonates with you, or the project itself, right? It might be something you use like all the time, and then you realize that there's this one feature that it just doesn't have, or there's a bug that really annoys you, and you can get involved in that. I'd say if it's a feature, you should definitely open like a discussion first. I've seen people open pull requests on my projects that I've had to decline, because even though it was a really nicely done pull request and I feel bad about declining it, I know that I cannot merge things that I'm not going to maintain, or it doesn't resonate with the messaging behind what this project does. Maybe there's a different project they need to make, and so I'll point them at that. But you know, open source maintainers are typically very protective over the scope of their projects, so be careful with features. And then like eventually you'll be working on something. This is a key part of starting with open source, is you have to be working on other things. So maybe it's a job, or maybe you're just involved in another open source community, and you will suddenly one day see a gap, like be a library or a command line tool or some other kind of dev tool. And you'll be like, oh, this should exist, or I have the unique insights to build this thing. That's when you start your project. Because if you need it, someone else is going to need it too.
For sure. Well, thank you guys for your time, Max and Matt. I had a great time enjoying hearing you two both give some insight to open source. So now we'll just kind of wrap everything up with any closing remarks. Matt, you can go first.
Yeah, sure thing. So yeah, I'm really excited for kind of the future of T. I'm hoping that it becomes the kind of de facto solution for helping kind of get open source projects funded. And yeah, I had a lot of fun today. Thank you so much for having me on.
You bet, Max. You want to give some closing remarks?
Yeah, I just want to thank Matt for coming on. It's always great to get more in depth talking about open source, and you know, how hopefully T can be one of the solutions towards ensuring its future stability. So thanks very much.
Awesome. Thank you both again. For anyone watching, this will live on our YouTube channel. As I'm sure you're aware, since you are probably watching it now there. Encourage you to stay up to date with T and everything we're doing at t.xyz. And you can head over to testnet at app.t.xyz. You'll find all of our official links on our website. As always, please practice due diligence. We've gained some popularity over the last couple of months, we being T, so we do have a lot of imposters. So make sure you're safe. And thanks everyone for listening. Take care.